welcome to this session of Book Talk, where we're very happy to have May Castleberry join us. May is the editor of Contemporary Edition series published by the Library Council of MoMA since 2000. As their website states, it gives artists an opportunity to experiment with the book as an art form. Prior to 2000, she was the librarian at the Whitney Museum and an editor of limited edition artist books which paired original art and new writing. I had known May's name for a long time and was surprised to meet her at the Booksmart fair in the fall. Somehow, I expected her to be an intimidating figure. And I was in pleasant conversation with her for quite a while before I asked her name. And it turned out that she was a person very eager and willing to engage, and I lost no time in asking her to be a facilitator at this series. In an interview with Robert Morris Levine for Zolo Press, she remarked, "Even as a grizzled veteran, I know that every artist presents a challenge that I haven't encountered before. The artist's book is at its best when it rethinks the very form it takes. And that's the ultimate challenge. You have to let the artist go out on a limb, explore it, and as an editor, you have to follow them out on it to try to determine whether the limb will break or not. It's always surprising." I'm looking forward to hearing about the books that May has been involved in producing, and please join me in welcoming May Castleberry.
Thank you, Ronnie. That was the perfect introduction, and I can skip a little bit of mine now. And thank you, Karina, both of you, for having me. Thanks for coming out on the cold night. I'm going to start with kind of just diving right into one of the 20 books I did at the Whitney Museum. And this one, most of the books at the Whitney took a form of artists making original artwork, writer contributing something absolutely new. That was a rule I made for the Whitney. When I got to MoMA, I was wise enough to drop that rule, but the complexity of it was interesting, and but there are different reasons for it to be loose or not. But anyway, this book is called The Magic Book. And I'm going to take the copy so you can see the title over to Karina. It is by Ricky J. And you'll see a number of artists: Vija Celmins, Jane Hammond, Ligon, Justen Ladda, Philip Taaffe, William Wegman. And how this came about was in 1989, I'd heard about Ricky J. and he's a great sleight of hand artist. He died 2018, but he'd worked with David Mamet on setting up cons and feints for Hollywood for a long time. He collected, if you might have heard of him, just a great collection that went on sale at Sotheby's in about, 20, in the COVID period, and it was anything important in the history of magic, which had a considerable bibliography from the almost immediately after printing began. And I wanted him to give a talk to our group, the Library Council. We had 75 members who supported gave us the money to venture capital so we could start books almost every year. And we also had 3 meetings that he couldn't find a time to speak, but then we started talking, and I thought, is there a way where you could do a book for us, with us? And we couldn't really think of anything. Then I went to visit him in Los Angeles and looked at his collection, and he talked to me about this type of book, which was really a prop for itinerant magicians in the 16th, 17th, even the 18th century, when printing was pretty recherché, and you could show a book to a group And they thought this was the most amazing thing. It's sort of like several books in one. You move your hand across the tabs, or you blow the pages if it was very light pages, which we don't have. And then I'm going to show you in a minute. In the 16th century, it would have been images like this: demons, harlequins. In the next, alphabetical follies, and generally, I just thought it was a fantastic form. And I said, well, what if we asked artists to do something, artists whose work reminds us of what happened in 16th, 17th, 18th century blow books. And he said, yes. So we had the most wonderful time going around and visiting artists that I proposed, and not all of them made the cut. He was, I mean, his cut, it was really severe. And they would say, even the artists working with him would say, I've never been told, but that's what he could do. I couldn't do that. But in any case, we got these wonderful artists, and I'll just mention one, Vija Celmins, who some of you must know for her hypnotic, find the page. Her hypnotic photography-like prints and drawings, and this actually was printed by Leslie Miller of the Grenfell Press, right here. And we went to Vija and tried to convince her, because it's hard to get her to. It's hard work for her to make anything, and. Turns out she didn't have to work that hard, but I'll get to that. He said that he was a great sleight of hand artist, and he did his cards and told her, what can you follow here? And because her life is so much about observation, and she's full of confidence that she has the logic to follow anything, she was his favorite kind of person to trick. He said, and he said, absolutely, in some weird way, the easiest kind of person to trick. If you really believe you can do it, you're more trickable. But in any case, she was charmed, and it so happened that Leslie had been working with Vija, and she probably won't say a word, but anyway, Leslie. Would you like to say what happened, Leslie? No? Okay.
Do I remember?
You had a block that broke, and that was sort of, you couldn't really use it.
Yeah.
And so it was
So we took a piece of it and
Yeah.
we made this print, which
Right.
is an incredible print.
right, and I'm going to take this over
Wood
to,
engraving.
yeah, a wood engraving. So we got something like that, because it almost,
Right. I lost my print, you got it.
exactly, so that was really
I
good.
forgot about that.
Yeah,
Wasn't the only one that broke.
yeah. And so Leslie, with Pat Ray, who was Ricky's favorite printer on the West Coast, pulled this together and printed the edition and worked out how to manipulate the tabs, and it was really it was one of the more fun projects.
Talk about a math problem. I mean,
Yeah.
Europe was a math problem.
Yeah.
That was really a math problem.
Yes. So, then, well, I'm moving towards my, oh yes, here you have the, that was a math problem because they're upside down unless you put them the right way. But then, in 2000, Muehling Houston, who is a trustee at the Center for Book Arts, but he was then the chief of the library and archives at MoMA, asked me to come work with him at MoMA, and I've known him for some years. He was a wonderful colleague and friend. Of course, I wanted to do that and work with more international artists, and well, there are many great reasons to do that. And so I set up a program with Mylan's help in getting new members. I brought 40 members from the Whitney, and the wonderful trustees at MoMA plus Mylan helped find more, which secured the future of the the program at MoMA, and then our first book followed some of the same DNA that I set up at the Whitney, but it was with a Brazilian artist named Beatriz Milhazes, who I visited, I had the good fortune of visiting in Rio, and she's a woman of materials. She showed me tiles, and we went to the places where the people who were doing the samba floats were collecting all kinds of pieces of plastic and materials. And so she wanted to make a book about the sights and sounds of Rio and about the traditional music she grew up with, which included Tom Jobim and Caetano Velosa. And we also wanted to, like everybody might have, we wanted to make a CD at that time. That turned out to be impossible, but we could get the lyrics. And she made notes around the lyrics. There's typography designed by a man named Pablo Medina, who created his own font for this book. And the whole book was meant to sort of give you a sense of the strong connection between music and visual art in Brazil. This book was bound by Claudia Cohen, whom some of you may know. She's out in Seattle and does fantastic books with examples of with paper, decorative paper. But at that time, she was living in Massachusetts. Through Claudia, we met somebody who's been really important to the program for all the time at MoMA after this, who was Mark Tomlinson, the binder who worked with her. And so we
So I have a question.
Yes.
Do you give it over completely for them to design, or you're overseeing the design work, or how do you fit in? How does this all work?
The artist is given priority for design.
Okay.
Always, entirely the
Okay.
artist.
Okay.
And then I present, if I can, the people I recommend who could work well with them. Sometimes there are reasons, like we needed a Latin American typographer. Sometimes we'd like to have try to have different designers, but because there's so many variables, it's hard to make these books. And it also becomes a story of friendship. Like I've worked with Leslie many, many times because I know she's going to do a great job. She's going to support the artists perfectly, and she's great. And so there are other designers I've worked with, if it's just that's sort of where they are. But in this case, I mean, I would say Beatriz, I'm not telling you, a very important person is Jean-Paul Russell at the Durham Press, who was working with her in silkscreen for many, many years, and he helped her do this. But I do we sort of make it out of thin air. We don't start with any preconceived notion. I will nudge, or sometimes I'll have a little idea of where it could go, knowing the person. But I try to let them propose, and then I control. We can't do it if we can't afford it, which there's an idea that we can't afford. So it's sort of, yeah, it's like that. So I don't know what.
And the edition size
This
is
is
determined?
the edition size for almost all of the books I've done is about 120 to 200, and that seems 200 is after that it gets to be very hard to sell them, and I'm just the one person, and we have about 75 members. They take some, the artist has some. We try to sell some to libraries, but anyway, for a long time I was really kind of apologetic about limited editions because I was surrounded by so many people from the printed matter world who would say this is not for the public, and I would make books that were printed matter style books, and I would still sell 200, so I stopped feeling bad about only making 200, and it just seems to be a particular niche that I love, and there's just it's a wonderful, as you all know, it's just a wonderful field. So that is the that is the first book I did for MoMA. She wasn't well known then, but she is certainly now. And that, I should say, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but as a publisher, it's been fascinating watching things happen. I couldn't sell that very well. People would say, oh, it's so decorative. Blah, blah. Then 2 years later, it was just, I was so sorry we didn't make more. Same thing with Vija Celmins, who I first worked with in 1985 for the Whitney. People returned that book. It didn't sell at $900
Right.
until about 1992, and then suddenly it just went up, and there's been some vice versas, but I won't I won't go into that. So there's also this is not even an also. This is very important because we have here Ted Muehling. One of the authors, the designer, artist of this particular book by Oliver Sacks, Abe Morell, and Ted Muehling. And just starting with Ted, he's a astonishingly amazing metal worker, jeweler, object maker, working in porcelain, glass. If you don't know his shop, as Ronnie first when I came in, she said, "What are you wearing?" Ted Muehling. And so I've sort of outfitted myself with a lot here, but his shop at 103 Franklin is a cabinet of wonders. And that was a little bit of what we were going after when we made this book with Oliver Sacks. Now, the reason we worked with Oliver Sacks to show how he's developed, I was talking to Ted because I knew he would make an interesting book. And he'd been a friend of Vija's, and that's, again, sort of a network of friends. And I thought, what would you like to do, Ted? Let's talk about it. Things don't always develop when I'm talking to artists that, what would you like to do? But with Ted, he was talking about his interest in ferns. Everything he does is related to organic forms. He was interested in ferns. And I talked to... and we knew that we loved Oliver Sacks. He had an article in the New Yorker about ferns, and we thought, could we talk to him? And we could, because one of our wonderful trustees at MoMA, Aggie Gund, was a friend of his, and I got in touch with his assistant, who said, well, there's nothing new that we can give you, but there's a wonderful excerpt from the Island of the Colorblind, which is a book he wrote, I forget, it's sort of like 90. It is, the Island of the Colorblind concerns an island in Micronesia where there's a high incidence of colorblindness due to a hurricane that only 10 people survived, or a tsunami that 10 people survived in 1700. So a large portion of the population descended from that, and they have a color blindness that made them had a compensatory ability, which was to see the colors at twilight of silvers and blacks and whites. And they also, of course, lived in a tactile world. So with Ted's interests, we wanted to make a tactile black and white sepia colored book. And he also, Oliver Sacks took, I can give you this, he took a side trip to another island near the so-called Island of the Colorblind, which had an unusual, because of its geographic isolation, had an unusual stands of cycads and ferns, that in the intense, amazing variety of these two oldest remaining plants in the world. And so we had, so this first page, which Ted made, Could remind you of an archipelago, a night sky. It was laser cut.
Stealing from Via.
Stealing from Via.
Yeah, and she allowed that. Yeah, but it's,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it was cut.
But
It's
it's
also,
laser
you know, as we all remember, it's also the book I'd done right before this, 4 years before this, was Olafur Eliasson, and we had a really good
Ah.
laser cutter. Now, at that time, it still was, we needed that really good laser cutter in Germany. You didn't, pretty soon after that, we didn't need, it was everywhere.
Yeah.
But we did that, and,
An early map of the world that we made where Oliver was writing about, from London, where he was born, New York, where he lived, and Micronesia, where the Island of Rota existed. And so it's his amateur interest in these prehistoric plants. And it was fantastic text to work with.
it was. And one of the great things about the text is there was a real bibliophilic section where he remembered the affections of his childhood for anything to do with prehistoric plants. And he had these sepia-colored, like all things were from the 19th, early 20th century, books, and he remembered how impressed he was with them. So,
And this is Abelardo's work of these prints. And we went together to the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx with Oliver and Abe and me and went into the back route, the glass houses where they had all sorts of strange things, and Abe would shoot various ferns and, you know, prehistoric.
Yeah. And Oliver Sacks came in with his cycad cap.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
He was adorable.
yeah,
so
he
adorable.
was. He was adorable. And so these were made in a cliche Vert way, but they were actually scanned and made into prints. But he manipulated the ferns he got from the botanical garden, thanks to Oliver Sacks, and made them into prints and then scanned them. And then this is a peculiarity of our Ted. He was like this did, you can't see it. These Abe wanted he wanted glossy paper, and Ted.
There's glossing, yeah.
Yeah, we'll gloss over that.
Yeah, so I put
Right.
Japanese handmade paper
That's what it looks
over
like.
it to protect it and also
The wrinkle is
diffuse
beautiful.
it.
He also ironed every single one to get the right
Wrinkle.
texture for that, because we couldn't find it that way.
I was going to ask.
But also, I think when you look at it from the side, because we're talking about deep geological time, you get a sense of, well, or maybe it's not from the side, but when you're going through the book, you get a sense that you're looking at layers and layers of, it's almost like you're looking at stratification, in my opinion, but you'd have to go through the book to get that feeling.
But the printing
Yeah.
is Leslie, and
Yes.
the footnotes are more extensive than the text. So that's, you know,
That's lovely.
Oliver going his way. And I said to Leslie, can we get the footnotes on the page so we don't have to keep going back and forth? And it was a mathematical nightmare.
It
that
was
she
so much fun.
did. But she
Yeah.
rose to it, and it's so lovely to read this extremely beautiful text
Yeah.
with the footnotes, which are a continuation of it. Yeah, it was such a lovely project. Yeah. And also, Paul Wong at Dieudonné was a huge part of this because he made paper for us and pressed side pads into the paper, each one unique. Also the ferns and
And the cover,
cover was
thanks to
also-
you and Mark Tomlinson and Paul, this
Yeah.
is a sea fan that
Yeah,
got
they-
pressed.
with the
Pressed
hydraulic
it,
press,
yeah.
Paul made, and then when Mark Tomlinson, who is a genius, put them together, then I waxed them with brown wax. And so it became very leather-like, but it's paper.
Yeah, it feels like leather. I'm
And
happy
it has
to,
this texture.
but you guys probably know what this, do you want to, it doesn't matter.
It-
You can come
well,
back
the
up
paper
here.
became
Yeah.
like, almost like pressed leather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This is the side head. If you can
Side pad.
print that
Oh,
out.
wow.
So each book had a different side head pressed into this beautiful handmade paper that Paul did. Paul was a
So that's
genius.
relief? Is that a relief?
Each one is, yeah, it's a relief. So the hydraulic press pressed the paper onto the side head, and every book has a different side head on it, and it folds out like that. And side heads are pretty big. Yeah. It was so amazing to work with these people. Yeah. I wanted to make paper for the rest of my life. Forget gold and silver. Yeah, paper is really something.
I have the same problem.
Yeah, making is so fun.
May, is there like a general amount of time that these books take, or does it vary?
It takes, in MoMA, it seems like it takes 2 years. And just because we're starting, like I said, with thin air, we don't really know where we're going. And then and sometimes obviously you overlap. Like it took 4 years for the Magic book, but then I'm doing something in between. And it seemed like I did something almost every year at the Whitney. I think I had more energy when I was young, but I don't know.
I don't think 2 years is very long for this
Yeah.
at all.
I don't either,
No.
but some people sometimes say, 2 years, but so. What were you doing? But,
Oh, another amazing.
there we go.
And they made watermarks on the end pages of ferns.
Yeah.
So there's a translucent
There it
mark.
is.
Wow.
Just a detail that,
Yeah.
you have to be
It's
very observant
beautiful.
to notice.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
do have
so
to
you see
thank
that there.
Sue Gozen is a member of the Library Council, and she was so helpful in making this happen.
But they were very
Yeah.
indulgent, Mylan and May, in the extravagance of it. But nothing was too much trouble. It was so fun.
Well, some people you don't want to say no to, some people you do.
We have to.
So, yes. So, and here's another person. Just for, the last book I'll show you is by Tomás Saraceno. I made this we finished this in 2022. It probably took 3 years, partially because it was the COVID thing. And we thought, I set it up so that he's in Berlin. I went to visit him in Berlin, and I always thought that he's an architect, a thinker, an engineer, a thinker about space. And I don't know if you saw a show at the Shed where you could practically walk on a giant spider web made out of metal, and he's deeply concerned about the collapse of arachnids and spiders, and wants us to sort of develop our arts of noticing the life of spiders, the importance is everything as arachnids go, so our whole world goes, and all the species are gone. So anyway, he wanted to do a book, as I did. I went to him and I said, what about a pop-up book? And he said, yes, what about a pop-up book? So we were totally on the same page when we met, and started talking about this, and I wanted somebody in Europe to be very close to him. But we got this fantastic woman, Chisato Tamabayashi, a Japanese paper engineer and book artist herself in London, and we were about to get started, and then everything, we couldn't put anybody in the same studio, but we worked out how to share files and go over things, and so we talked on Zoom almost every day for 2 years. It took a very long time. That's one reason people said, what were you doing? It seemed like we're busy. But anyway, we, the cover I'll start with maybe is Leslie, this was towards the very end of the project I'm starting with. We decided we really wanted one of the tarot cards that Thomas has altered about spiders in history, and that is here. It says entanglement, and it's about sort of cobwebs everywhere. From arachnophobia to arachnophilia, we all need that to get to the place our planet needs. And Leslie printed that by letterpress. Mark bound the book. And that he had to work very closely with Chisato to make it work. This actually, Ted, we knew it looked kind of bare at a certain point. Once we got it all together, there was a certain point, and we decided, and because I had seen, for the Island of Rota, Ted had made bookmarks, so to speak, and I asked him if he would make bookmarks, spider bookmarks for this. Which Tomás loved.
And a friend of mine had a laser cutter, so we just cut the shape and I put silk on it, and so it became the bookmark. It was fun. It was easy, and I love Tomás.
Yes. And Leslie printed. There's not a lot of text, but Leslie printed. Oh no, I'm sorry, that part was, I forget. Was that?
It's all letterpress.
Yeah, it's all, okay. And then once you get to the, we have a letter, oh yeah, here we are. Yes, and this is, Chisato Tamabarashi saved us. She was so helpful in every way and so wonderful to work with. If anybody's thinking of a pop-up book, take a look at hers, talk to her, so recommend it. So this is the most...
Wow. So she did the paper cutout?
She did the paper cutting. She didn't want to do... We talked about laser cutting. That would have not worked unless we'd done many copies. So it was a combination of a very small machine. She could do that one on a small machine and then use her hand, but a lot of it is just strictly hand work. And this one is, so that's a room.
But you know what, you really should just show it on the table, because you're not,
But people are
although
way
they can't see.
pretty
from-
far
Yeah,
down. Yeah.
So open up the room.
But you could come up
Come up
afterwards.
after, because
Yeah.
it's
astounding.
And that's, okay, so that's a room because rooms, it's a museum room because rooms should have spiders in them. If you don't have a spider here, you've got to keep it here.
Well, when Thomas
And
does
then-
a show in the museum, if there's a spider web, he insists that that's a
Yes.
sacred place. And so no one can fuck with that.
Yeah.
And I love it. That's so, yeah.
And so this is Cosmic Web because he's done research, all the people in the spider world have done research to say in the way in which webs can look like cosmic shapes and spatial things. So they look like constellations. So we can get to the next one. And this is a cobweb forest. And Chisato also knew, because we had to do letterpress in London where she was. She knew people to do the letterpress, exchanging designs with Tomás and his team. Excuse me, not letterpress, silkscreen. And so anyway, maybe you'll see it afterwards. From that one you can't really see too much.
So the imagery was designed by Tomás?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she had to really, there are diving bell spiders. I don't know if all of you know about that. I didn't know about them, but there are some that to get their prey, get a bit of air, oxygen from above, and then go down below the water, and they can stay a while and breathe and
Do what they need.
eat, whatever, capture things. And then another bookmark. You need so many bookmarks when there's only when there's 10 pages. And that is
What's that?
that. And I could answer questions. Or we could, I don't know what people would like to do.
Let's do both.
Okay.
I have a question. When you work with artists who have never dealt with the book,
Right.
is there something that you need to do to clue them into some?
Well, I'm usually choosing artists who haven't dealt with the book, like, because if they don't need me, if they make books all the
Right.
time. So, but I try to pick people like Beatriz, very good with printmaking, and I could see that she sort of thought in a narrative way. So I'm picking people who I think are going to be very inclined. And the same thing with Tomás. It just worked out fantastically. He's made some beautiful books before, but they're more like catalogs for his shows, but that worked out really well. And for him, it was an experiment. And it's not like everything is always easy. I think, or being taped, or I don't know what that's. What's not like it's everything. People don't always get along. You have to, but. Because maybe an artist might want much more than you can possibly do, or the paper cutter could do. But anyway, but that's also just a fascinating part of it, and interesting. And I'll say with Beatriz, I mean, this really launched her. She got so interested in books after that. And that's a nice kind of feeling that the project is generative in ways afterwards that you wouldn't even notice while you're doing it, but then and then say Ricky said that our magic book, because it took so long and it was pro bono, it was the worst mistake he ever made time-wise, but it was, he still remembered it very well. And when David Mamet wrote his obituary of Ricky Jay, it was one of the 5 or 6 books that was listed, and I thought, wow, we never get listed in the New York Times for anything, so that was really nice.
Does the council have any say in terms of who the collaborators might be, or, I mean, do you have to run anything by them? Like do they give the money and then, okay, May, we trust you, do what you want?
Well, the first 2 years when I was just starting and young and tender and really shy about saying this is mine, we had a committee, but it didn't work out that well because you're married to this artist, and you have to be able to have more power than that, and you have to have made the choice in the beginning. Not that I've made always good choices, but that didn't work out, and so then at that point I took control and got much more confident, and just realized that's the way it was going to be a good book, and I could take credit or discredit for.
Good.
Oh, a question? Oh, I think that one, I'll come to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a question. How often are, for these books, I think you mentioned briefly that for from Arachnophobia to Arachnophilia, sorry, I'll speak up. There are collaborators or everyone on the team who made the book were maybe across, not all in one place. How often does do the teams of
That was the most remote team I could have ever imagined. And there was Mark Tomlinson in Massachusetts talking to Chisato and me, and that was real. But it's kind of the beauty of collaboration. But every single one of them, when I was starting to do the talk, I just realized there's so many people involved in all of them, many people, and I would really enjoy that, just working with a lot of people.
It sounds very.
As a network, yeah.
It sounds exciting to go and for the first book you discussed going on a hunt or chase to find people
Oh, I was just going to ask, I know you talked a little bit about this, but how do you think the industry of artist books has changed over the course of your career? And where do you think it's heading kind of in the future?
Industry in that, does it have an audience or does it?
Yeah, just, I guess just perceptions about it, the audience, the artists being willing to work with it.
I think artists are all these years, the artists I've found were so excited by the opportunity to work with books. That's just a given almost. It might be changing, not in a now, but I don't think so. I think artists are always changing. I mean, the difficult part is getting people to support it, and it always has been. But I think it's harder now. Like if I were just a little bit harder to find really devoted collectors who do the thing that you said, which is what we have to have them do. Is like, our next book is going to be whatever we're doing. You have to trust us. You might not like it. In fact, you might not like half the books we do, but please stay a member. Which they don't always. They go, oh, I didn't like that one, and why did it take 2 years? And so, or not. And so you're just lucky. You have to hope that they have a philanthropic feeling about it. And I'm lucky to be working in both cases for a place that where there's some people there who don't care that much about the books, but they kind of want to support the library, and some people who want to, or vice versa.
It's a niche more than an industry. I
Yes,
think.
it's a niche.
So
I wish I could.
It's really, you have to accept that there's a limited audience for what you're doing, and you can survive even on jewelry with a niche. You don't have to be Tiffany. You can be some other oddball over here and survive the thing.
And so it's not really an industry. I don't think it's going to become. But we love it, and I do think they have this impact when people see them forever. They're forever amazing in libraries or exhibitions, and artists certainly look at them.
So I have a question about the book with the spider webs, the pop-ups. So I'm assuming that prototypes were done of these books, probably all of these books, before the final book was made. Is that true?
Oh
or
yes.
not true?
Prototype for every page, prototype for everything. 6 prototypes.
So
Yeah.
did one person, did Tomás design every single pop-up?
Well, he had to work very closely with Chisato, or he wouldn't have been able to do that. It was out of his, even though he does giant sculptures and all that, that was out of his wheelhouse.
I see.
And so she, as he said, and I say, she saved us. So
Has there been an exhibition of the prototypes as well as the finished book?
well, we don't keep the. We
You don't
don't
keep the
really.
prototypes?
No, but the prototypes I'm talking about, they wouldn't quite, in that case, a lot of it is on the computer,
Oh.
and then files and files and files that we did over and over again, and
Oh.
then, it's too bad.
Yeah.
But,
Well, what about these, May?
oh, those, we have to talk to Ted, where are the prototypes? What did you do with them?
I have a box full.
So-
It's still analog.
Great,
No computer. Yeah.
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 Has,
Oh, in the back, far back? Yeah,
Thank you for sharing your incredible work with us. I wanted to know what your academic or educational background was to do what you do and work with the institutions that you have.
oh. Well, I don't know. I mean, in a way I was, I had studied painting, printmaking, and art history. Then I went to the Columbia. My husband, I had just married him, and I moved right after college to New York, and I got a job at the Columbia Butler Library where they have the rare books, and a very bad job, And then I got another job. While I was doing that, they had a library school program at that point, and they had wonderful people teaching more about bibliography and the history of the book. And I did that, and then I was just extraordinarily lucky because I got a job, a very bad job, it didn't sound like it, but it was, at the Whitney Museum as the only librarian, and it was, there was a librarian there before, but when he left pretty soon after, and I was shelving books, but I was also learning. Well, it's amazing how you can you look back retrospectively and you just see, I thought I was learning about books, and then about 3 years later, it wasn't my academic prowess or anything, but it was, I think, naivete that helped me, where I'm like the grizzled veteran that I say I am now. But I said, I could see lots of interesting books being made at that time. I had done my thesis on artist books of the printed matter type that were at MoMA.
Nice.
And so anyway, the director of the museum said, we've got to raise money for this library, and I agreed, because I wanted to buy more books for the library, and so I said, well, let's start a book club.
This was at the Whitney?
Yeah, at the Whitney. So easier said than done, but a lot of, false starts, and I could only have done it at the Whitney, because the Whitney at that time, it was a place where you could experiment. I couldn't have done this at MoMA at all. You couldn't do something that hadn't existed before in that way. So, and they were, nice, and I had wonderful colleagues. The curators there were fantastic, and they all ended up being directors of museums, Richard Armstrong and Lisa Phillips, and I could talk to them about what artists. I needed to be in sync with the museum and the artists that they were showing, but they gave me a lot of credit of choosing, so that really helped. But I feel like I sort of a process of self-education and really good luck for being in a place that was experimental enough to let me grow.
Do you do the sales yourself? I don't mean you, but the museum? Or do you
I do
use
everything.
You
the
do
sales, yeah, just because that's another thing. Like I know the people after all this time, and they know me.
Mm-hmm.
And the libraries, we've gotten really good support from the Getty, Yale, and Princeton, and the New York Public Library. And then but also when I'm dealing with somebody like this, there are people who are I find out who the Tomás Saraceno fanatics are, and that works.
Yeah.
Or spider fanatics.
Yeah, we had some. Yes, we did.
What did that book sell for?
It started at $3,500, and then it ended up at $6,500. And then we just don't have any copies left, which is really good. Yeah. Back?
Yeah. I was wondering if you could go into recall some anecdotes of instances in which the process of making the books was very important. I know you mentioned sort of laser cutting and sort of digital design for some of these, but could you speak to maybe a relationship with digital to analog and instances, maybe related to almost pressing the fern into the paper, in which the process of making the book was sort of very important to the artist and how it was being.
Well, I could say that the process is chosen by the artist, and I could see when we were working with Olafur Eliasson, that's probably the best known book we did. It's called Your House, and it was all laser cut and sliced. It was 800 slices of a house so you turn the pages and looks like you're going through this. Well, that had to be laser cut, which at that point, nobody was doing laser cut. So yes, that one was already as technical and as digital as could possibly be, but it was appropriate for the artist. And then with Ted, when he makes his jewelry, he hammers it out himself, and his prototypes are real and not. I shouldn't say real. They're
not computer generated.
Yes, they're not computer generated. Yeah, so basically it really depends on the artist. And I try to be as flexible, and to your point, like just if they want to go out on that limb, let's do that.
My question kind of precedes the process part, but when you select an artist, how do you begin to introduce them to the possibilities of book arts?
Oh,
Like what kind of
well,
media and materials?
it depends on the artist and how much they need. I think I'm cheating because I'm picking artists who are really very just primed to be ready for it. Like they love handmade paper, or they find they do, and you could just tell that they would. So, but like with Tomás, I could say pop-up, but he had a collection of children's pop-up books. So I guess I'm really lucky, but they love meeting the potential printers, and they love all of that.
But you're smart and intuitive, so she knows what she's doing.
She's like the virtual assistant that knows all the tools, where they are, and how to use them, and what they're best for.
It's really fun, and you don't have to do the work yourself. Just gotta do it. But anyway, I don't know if am I overstating?
Yeah, well, maybe can I ask one last question, which I think might be helpful for you in your question about the budget, but and also relates a little bit to your question about introducing artists to process. But working for institutions like the Whitney and MoMA, I'm sure that you find that artists that you approach imagine the biggest budget possible. And so how do you set them up with the right expectations for process and outcome, and kind of manage that along the way? Because I think the personalities are probably the biggest challenge in this.
They are, and that's sometimes, well, they look at what the other artists have gotten, and then and they kind of want that at least, and so that sort of sets things up. And sometimes, last year I tried to do a book. I was going to talk about it, but what resulted, that's still in process. But I wanted to do a book of swatches, different artists, and looking at those wonderful, like Mindy Dumansky is putting online all those beautiful books of the swatches of cloth that turn into these incredible abstract works. And I thought, oh, what if we could do a collective project with, say, 5 or 6 artists? And I started approaching them, and they go, wait a minute, I'm looking online, and I see that everybody gets their own book. Where's my own book? I shouldn't. The person I ended up doing, she didn't say it that way. The person I ended up doing this with, a book about cloth, she so deserved her own book, and I decided, but she looks at that, she wasn't going to be part of a group, so that's one way where I didn't manage it. It just happens. It seems to go that way. Managing expectations, though, is a big hard one. Yeah.
And I guess I have one final question before we close. Are you working on anything new right now?
Well, it's this wonderful book with Sonia Gomes, who is 75 years old. She's been making art with cloth ever since she was 20, and only was seen as an artist in the last 15 years, about an Afro-Brazilian artist who suddenly just has gotten a lot of attention. She'll be in the Venice Biennale, and I'm very excited about that. With poetry, includes poetry that she herself wrote and others wrote.
Wow. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, May.
Thank you.
I'm sure that there are lots of people in the audience who have more questions that they want to ask. So after we conclude, please feel comfortable to come up, chat with May, and take a look at these beautiful publications. We'll open this.
Yeah, I can show this to you in the right. You can see it on the table. It would be easier.
Yeah. And thank you very much to Ronnie Gross for organizing.
Yes.